Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Centric. This big show where I talk about TV shows that are crime dramas. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the series premiere of A Murder at the End of the World. Great series premiere. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. So I wasn't kind of expecting the opening to be the way it was. Like, obviously, that our main protagonist, I knew that going into this, that it was going to be like a murder mystery, but I didn't realize that it was going to be a situation of, for one, she's an author, but it also like dives into who she is. She's an amateur detective. Darby, not Darby. Well, yes, Darby is her first name because I was, whatever in my head, I was almost treating it like that was her last name. Her last name's hard, but she's played by Emma Corrin, which my introduction to her was playing Esme in Pennyworth. That was the first thing I believe I ever saw her in. But like her kind of like, you know, reading her book a little bit in front of a crowd. And it sucks so much that the moment she went up there, everyone else started walking. I was like, that sucks. But then like the moment she started getting into it a little bit, because maybe that's also supposed to be a little bit of like a nod to like, you know, our world where it's like, oh, like a good crime drama would like a good murder mystery will kind of like draw you in. Like we're, you know, I mean, that's why true crime podcasts are as big as they are and stuff like that, you know. Once again, there's good and bad to that, but I'm wondering if like that was almost kind of it, but also like the way she presented it, because I love that she's like, usually you don't start at the end, kind of, that's like when you're doing these readings, that's kind of what you're not supposed to. I guess it's like you don't want to start at the ending because the point is to kind of entice your audience to get them to read the book, but it's like, right, if you get the ending, maybe you're going to be like, well, I'm intrigued to find out the journey. It's really interesting to kind of see, because at first I was like, wait, are we going to find out this is after the murder that took place at the quote unquote at the end of the world, which we later on find out it's Iceland? I was like, is that what this is? But then it starts off with her and Bill. I was like, oh, I guess not. I was like, oh, okay, so I guess it's just kind of giving us background on her. Her and Bill met on these forums. They were hunting down this very specific serial killer. They were trying to, like, they ended up narrowing it down to who it was, but it turns out this person was, at least the way she talked about it, made it seem like, oh, he's an ex-cop. Because, like, Bill was like, no, we're not just going to break into this dude's house. Or at least let's let the cops know where we are. She's like, what, for them to stop us? Because that blue veil of, like, right, no one would suspect him of being a killer. Understandable where Bill's coming from. Like, no, I don't want to do this. But, you know, Darby's like, I'll do it by myself then. And so, especially the way Darby talks about it, it's that interesting and complicated thing about hindsight. That it's like, right, even in the telling of the story, it's like, right, it's hard to fall in love when you're tracking down a serial killer because you're so focused on, you know, that goal that you're not paying as much attention to what's kind of right in front of you, what was developing between them, because she was more so focused on the case, because it is what brought them together. And I think for Bill, he wanted more from it, but for Darby, whether it was her guarding herself, or because she has a bigger goal in mind, because she had talked about like there's 40,000 deaths, unidentified deaths. You know, some of those, or half of those are accidents, heart attacks, so on and so forth. But then like there are others are straight up murders, and a lot of those people that are murdered, that those crimes go unsolved, statistically are more likely a woman. You know, and I wonder, is that what brings her into the fold of everything that goes down in this story? Is that why she was chosen by Andy, or maybe Lee? We'll get to that in a second. But going through the story, we find out about a hacker named Lee, who is the inspiration for, because I thought that was also interesting too, making it so that she's not only a like amateur detective, she's also like a budding hacker. Like she's in that hacker space and stuff like that. So she was inspired by this hacker named Lee Anderson, who basically got doxxed. What was it? Also, like her dog's head was decapitated, and its head was left on her doorstep or something like that. I was like, Jesus. But like using that hack, she ended up opening all these garages. I feel like, and she even admits this at the time, well, you know, present day admits, like, right at that time, I didn't have a good sense of danger, knowing, like, because the smart thing would have been, like, hey, on the off chance someone comes back to the house, shouldn't someone stay behind to, I don't know, like, keep a lookout, you know, in case, because I was like, I'm surprised it took as long as it did. I mean, to be fair, they fell asleep when they were like trying to dig up, like in the, because it's like, oh, the basement, because the house is being sold, so the basement was recently paved, and it's like, okay, so we need to like dig up here because this is most likely where a victim's body is, specifically the first victim, because you can find that, you can connect them to all these other potential murders, because they do say that he's a serial killer. And they ultimately end up finding the body in the stairs. I figured the stairs were going to have some significance because when she was going down, she's like, whoa, they're uneven. And I was like, okay, so I thought the play it was going to play into it was like, oh, they're going to have to run up the stairs and there's going to be an issue or somebody's going to fall or something's going to go wrong with the stairs because they're uneven. I thought that's how it's going to come into play. It's like, no, it's uneven because they were shoddily put together because it was meant to conceal a dead body. But the guy comes home. Once again, they were there all night. Also, your car is in the garage. I guess if your car's parked off on like the side, like road or whatever, like on the side, especially if it's an unfamiliar car, people in that cul-de-sac, like suburban area would just be like, whose car is that? Like, you know, kind of like a neighbor watch thing of like, oh, that's suspicious. So maybe that's why. But it's like, wouldn't there be an issue with you just strolling up in the, parking your car in the garage? Because the moment someone sees your car's in the garage, wouldn't they immediately piece it together? Like, oh, like, wait, what? Like, that's why, once again, it's just young and naive and not really thinking this. Or once again, as she said, not having a real sense of danger of like, right, you're so young and like steadfast in this that you're not thinking of the ramifications. I mean, hell, I was almost for a second like, whoa, is Bill dead? Because home dude walked up with gun in hand about ready to pop. I was like, I'm curious, did he end up killing himself? We don't get the answer to that, but I'm curious, did he end up killing himself? Because he did point the gun towards them, but maybe he's like, damn it, I've been found out. And, you know, also like, especially if you're a cop, like it's going to really, because for one, the first victim was found out to be his wife. So probably killed himself because if he goes to prison, he's a cop. Cops don't do well in prison, so maybe there's a little bit of that. But yeah, I was like, did Bill die? But then specifically the person there was like, why isn't Bill here with you? She's like, oh, I haven't talked to Bill in a couple. I was like, oh, okay. Oh, well, no, she didn't give an answer at that time. She does later. But when someone asked her that, I was like, oh, does that mean Bill's alive? And then we find out like, oh yeah, Bill's kind of a well-known, as they put it, guerrilla artist named Fangs. He goes under the pseudonym Fangs. So I was like, okay, so he's alive. And they haven't talked in years. Because we did get a little flashback of like, her waking up like after everything went down and he was sitting in the tub being like, we almost died. And it scared the crap out of him and he left, leaving the message like, what was it? You're both too much and not enough all at the same time. It's like, that's, I don't know if mixed messaging. It's just, I mean, the heart's complicated, you know, and it's just like, right, it is too much with like trying to love someone who, there's something more there that even he can't find the words to really describe, but it's also not enough in regards of, I think, it's not enough to keep waiting around for something that might not happen between us type of situation. I mean, it was also sweet too because they were playing that song. That's actually the first time I think I've ever heard the original song. Because my association with that song is specifically, obviously, it was because I was like, why does that sound so familiar? It's like the Nicki Minaj song was Your Love. I really love that song. I was like, oh, so this is where it was sampled from. The song was Annie Lennox, No More I Love Yous. So I think that's the first time I've ever heard the song. Because the doo-doo-doots and the melody, once again, I know from Your Love. So I was like, oh, interesting. But her getting invited by Andy, who ended up marrying Lee, the person that because apparently the book Darby wrote, that book Silver Doe was specifically about one of this guy's victims that was kind of found in her hometown, or like her town, and that's what jump started a lot of that. But it was dedicated to Lee because Lee was like, at the time, one of the like most well-known like female coders. So in the hacking sphere. So it's like she was familiar with her in that way. And it seems like she's a massive inspiration for Darby. It turns out she's married to Andy, who's played by Clive Owen. That was also creepy, the whole Ray situation when he was... when I was like, it's like, oh, it wants access to your camera, your Bluetooth, and your microphone. I'm like, what the hell is this? And it becomes this AR situation. I was like, well, what's going on? But it's like not even just like, I don't know if that technically counts as AR because it is, you're dealing with an AI that's able to project itself on like your camera and stuff like that. The AI Ray, which if you're familiar with Altered Carbon, it kind of reminds me of Poe a little bit. Just a little, whereas like Poe has a little more personality, it still feels like Rey is very rigid, but it definitely gave me Poe vibes. The actor, Edoardo Ballerini, I hope I'm pronouncing that right. I believe this, if I'm not mistaken, isn't he... I thought so. I looked it up. I was like, I feel so bad because it's such an old reference, but I was looking at him like, isn't that the son from the movie, the John Leguizamo movie, The Pest? Looked it up. Yes, it's him. I was like, I feel so bad because I'm bringing up a movie from like 97. It's like, you've done so much in your career, but it's like, that's my association with. I feel like I've seen him in other stuff too, but that was where my mind immediately went to. Growing up, I really loved that movie. I've only seen it like a handful of times. I don't think I've seen it in more recent years, but yeah, like that was just, like I said, the AI situation was kind of interesting, and she gets invited to go to this spot with Andy, and obviously gets on a plane, and there's a lot of really interesting people, some familiar people, like there's Martin, who is played by Jermaine Fowler, which I'm trying. I don't think I've seen anything with Jermaine Fowler. I'm familiar with his name, but I don't think I've seen anything with him in it. But he's a filmmaker. Then we have Sean, which once again I talked about this when it came to Barry, because the director, she might have also been a writer. I think she might have been a writer and director of, maybe just a director of Coda. Her name is Sean. That was the first time in my life I've ever seen Sean spelled S-I-A-N, as a Sean myself, S-E-A-N. That was just the first time I'd ever seen that before. But the actress who plays Sean is Alice Braga. And I was like, I know her from Queen of the South, but I was like, wasn't there something more recent I'd seen her into? Queen of the South is one of those shows I have on the back burner where like, I want to watch that. I've seen bits and pieces of it. But I was like, wasn't there something else I know her from? And I was like, right, she was in The Suicide Squad. I was like, that's, I think, the other thing I've seen her in more recently. So, and we also had David, played by Raul Esparza. I'm butchering that, but I was like, yeah, I know you. I'm blanking on his character's name, but I know him from Law and Order SVU. There was someone else. I was watching oh yeah, Billy the Kid, where another like Law and Order actor popped up. So I just thought that was funny. Specifically, the prosecutor side of things. Like, both actors are prosecutors. It's just interesting. But either way, there's all these different people with more bigger, like, circumstances, as David kind of puts it in the most dickish way possible. Because here's Darby, this Arthur, who even Martin's like, oh yeah, people call her like the Zoomer Sherlock Holmes or something like that. But David was kind of a dick, being like, oh, Andy's the type of person that gathers people who are able to have big businesses, and it's for the future, big companies and yada yada, so on and so forth. Because even Lou May, one of the people that I'm butchering, it's probably Lou May, is someone, she built smart cities in China, and so like they're all connected to stuff. Sean, she was one thing, but then she did something. She actually was like in this world, she's the first woman to be on the moon, and so because there's a lot of industry people and people who've done big things, because they even had this bet going back and forth, like most likely five people, there's a total of 9 guests. 5 people were most likely brought in by Andy, and the other 4 were brought in by Lee, most likely. So I guess the more, like, because you have someone like a Darby and a Martin, who are on a more artistic side of things, I guess, technically speaking. So you'd assume maybe Lee's the one that invited them. There is that sequence she had when she was thinking about the day that Bill left. It seemed like she was kind of awake. I guess maybe she went back to lie back down, but it's hard to say if that was 100% a dream sequence. But there's this moment like where Martin's sleeping, he's clutching his hands like really tight, like he's having a nightmare, and he's kind of muttering to himself. Feels like that's going to be an important detail. Like, she probably wasn't dreaming. She was probably half awake when she had that, because she heard the dripping in the bathroom, and that's what like started the the Bill flashback, but then like we cut back to her like waking up. So it's like I don't think that was all a dream, but maybe it's just kind of like a mix of, like I said, her being like half asleep. So maybe it's just kind of, maybe it was all in a dream, but like her subconscious mind is trying to tell her something. Because Andy turns out to be circling to like everything, that Andy ends up being the on the big picture guy, that the world keeps going in the direction that it's going. Like, obviously, I want to basically get us moving in the right direction. So I've gathered up a lot of people really good in their fields, and I want to bring us all together to make advancements that will better the world for his son, which I'll go ahead and say it. There's his and Lee's son, Zoomer, that has to be Bill's kid. Because the way Andy was kind of like, okay, Zoomer, no, come here, sit by me and stuff like that. Then there's the look on Bill's face. He looks to Lee. Obviously, we know him and Lee have had a relationship. He even asks, like, oh, how old are you? And Bill's like, oh, I'm 5 years, yada, yada, 20 days and like 17 seconds. I'm like, interesting. And when's the last time, I was about to call her Emma by her real name. When was the last time Darby saw Bill? 6 years ago. So that's also got to make her feel a little conflicted, because, I mean, first and foremost, she wasn't expecting to see Bill Hill. Even I was, and I was like, interesting. Because I was like, is that Bill thing just going to stay like, well, jumping ahead, wasn't expecting him to be the murder victim. I thought they'd probably actually work together in this regard, but I guess it almost makes perfect sense for Bill to be the victim, potentially. I mean, I'm sure he's dead. Like, he's in a process of dying, but it's probably a situation of he probably did like die. There were 2 episodes released. I've only seen the first one, so I haven't seen the second one yet, but he'll probably die at the beginning of the second episode or whatever. By the time Darby gets back, he's dead. Who knows? Sadly, she doesn't have her partner in crime anymore with solving this, but it also sucks too, because it's like there's so much history, like such a long period of time, and they lost touch. I even love like when he was like, oh yeah, you're not going to take part like that. Oh, not a fan of the icebreaker. Like, I don't know if that was like him kind of being like, oh, you kind of ruined my opportunity to kind of create an icebreaker or whatever. And she just like punches him in the stomach, almost like, you dick, we haven't like seen each other in so long, and all of a sudden you're popping up here, But he's like, he even admitted his reasons for being there is because of Lee. So obviously it puts like Andy at the top of your suspect list, but I don't know. Knotless ends up having God, what was that movie? I'm forgetting what it's called. It's a movie called Mindhunters from 2004. If you're familiar with the movie, don't watch the movie, because I'm going to kind of not really spoil it, but I'm curious, is this going to have a Mindhunters twist? If you've seen the movie, you know what I'm saying, but like, I don't want to give away the movie if you've never seen it. I really enjoy it. I don't know like how it holds up almost like 20 years later, but because like I said, I specifically said the movie, don't confuse it with the TV show Mindhunters. But I mean, it's kind of in the same vein of like what it's about. But either way, I'm curious if that's going to be kind of the twist to this mystery. I won't, like I said, to avoid spoilers, I won't say what the exact thing is. If we get to the end, when we get to the end of this and it kind of ends up being that, then I'll kind of explain it, then end up spoiling Mindhunters. But for now, I'll keep it as that vague notion of that ending of like, I'm curious if that's kind of the direction we're going. But obviously it's like immediately like, well, Andy has to know about Zoomer being Bill's kid. It seems pretty obvious. It seems like they were setting the groundwork for that. But I don't know. It could be a red herring situation. I mean, the obvious red herring situation seems like it could be about that, but I don't know. Because why? I mean, Lee. Because it makes me wonder: is that why Lee, when Darby walks by the room and sees Lee almost looked at her, almost like, whoa, like did she knows who Darby is because she probably knew that she invited Bill and wasn't so it could be a thing of Bill was invited by Lee, but Andy invited Darby just to kind of fuck with Lee a little bit. I don't know. Because maybe it's a thing of Lee's in an unhappy relationship, but with such a rich and powerful person, you kind of have to placate him for whatever reason. I don't know. It felt like awkward when he was just making a point of like, oh, no, come over here, Zoomer. Then there's also the whole situation of like, oh yeah, don't feed him stuff. For a second I was like, the food poisoned or something, and you're trying to keep your son from eating it, or is that supposed to be a little indicative of maybe Bill has a very specific constitution, and if he's Zoomer's dad, like some of that food constitution, like maybe certain food doesn't sit well with him, maybe that's also supposed to be applicable in this case. Like maybe that's supposed to be indicative of, oh yeah, Bill and him. I mean, we didn't really get to see Bill too much at the dinner scene, so, but maybe that's what that's supposed to imply. Like maybe they have a similar constitution when it comes to certain foods and stuff. It almost feels like the only person who's really taken any interest, like Sean seems like she's somewhat interested. Lumie seems like she's interested just because it's like, oh wow, you're super young. She's like, oh, like, you know, and Darby's like, I'm older than I look. But then there's Martin seems like the only one who's interested in Darby because he's read the book and he's heard what people kind of talk about her, and even he's the one that knows who Bill is. That is like, oh, Bill, is Bill the one that went with you just on your road trip? Is that the same like one who goes by Fangs? And what's the character's name? Zeba is a big fan of him, and that's the only reason why she supposedly came is because she heard Bill was here, but she didn't know, like, she's saying all this stuff about Bill and stuff, and then it's like, wait, you know Bill? It's like, I mean, you know him? It's like, yeah, I knew him back when he was just, you know, Bill, going by the name Bill, not Fangs. So that's the only reason why she'll probably wanted to kind of get a little close to, it almost felt like Martin was kind of trying to do her a solid because he sees these hoity-toity people trying to look down upon her just because she's an author, a crime author. But I think it was him trying to boost her up in other people's eyes a little bit. I think that was him helping out in that regard. He'd even talked about, I think even talked about someone adapting her book or whatever into a movie as a filmmaker himself. I don't know. Obviously, it's like this is the setting stage episode, so it's just a lot of introduction to the characters. And there's some of these characters we didn't really get to know much about. There's a guy who's at the table, like, guy doesn't even have a single line of dialogue in the episode. Like, him and Darby matched eyes when they first showed up in Iceland, and he's at the dinner table, but, like, he doesn't say anything. Then there's, like, the robotics dude, Oliver, and him talking about, which you assume a lot of, like, each person's circumstances will most likely play into this murder mystery in some shape or form. Like the guy who, like I said, Oliver, who's the robotic guy, who's the whole, like, oh, deep fake situation of, like, oh, yeah, I don't even need your voice to be able to fake something. Then there's also, because Zeba's whole thing is, when I say her name, it just makes me think of Ziva from NCIS. But her whole thing was like she helped kind of create encryption like message, like she got, I think, helped like make large advancements in that, because in Iran she would, like, she helped like end-to-end message encryption, like she utilized that for her activism and what she's been a part of. So once again, you're talking about some pretty big figures in different spaces, and like I said, making Darby just kind of feel so alone, especially when Andy kind of said such a dick thing of like, right, if I didn't invite you here, that means Lee did, and I have no idea why she would do that. Ha ha ha. Made Darby feel bad, which is like very shitty. But like I said, that's why it feels like there's definitely more to that marriage situation that's not all kosher. That's not all good. So, but it was kind of nice for as short-lived as it was, the conversation between Darby and Bill and them kind of catching up a little bit. Him having read the book, and the way he talks about it, it seems like they were together, like, searching for, like, that year, but it seemed like maybe Darby kept a lot of stuff close to the vest. The way he talked about, like, oh, yeah, your book, and how, you know, having a father who's a coroner obviously makes her a little easier around dead bodies, but also, like, not having a mom, so you also had to fill the role of a mom in some cases, and even a father, because of your dad probably not being around as much, and so the complications that kind of come from that type of upbringing, and that it kind of made her into the person that she is, and kind of talking about that. And he talked about her book, like, the moment I closed it, like, it felt like pure art, because even he was like, yeah, like, it felt at the time, now in retrospect, I can say at the time it felt like what we were doing was so salacious, but now I recognize, like, oh, that was stupid for me even thinking that, because you were just looking out for the type of people who fall through the cracks. She kind of gives me, and, you know, obviously, like, there's comparisons to make the same network situation, but it reminds me, she kind of gives me vibes of Poet, whereas like Poet kind of transferred to that whole Poet from Class of '09, the TV show, the crime drama, specifically science fiction TV show. It kind of gives me the same feeling vibe to some extent, but like Poet transitioned towards that more so because of like, everything that kind of goes down storyline wise. But I think this kind of seems like it's more Darby's mission from the very get-go, because of like those statistics of like the unidentified deaths being mainly, statistically being more likely women. But I am curious what Bill was going to tell Darby about. He's like, I have to tell you something, because she's thinking like, oh, like you got the nuclear codes and the only way you're going to give it is like when I fuck you or whatever. But he's like, you being the way you are, it makes it very like hard to love you, because he's like, you left me so many times before I ever left you. And I think there's a part of you that doesn't even know how, what, or when, or even why it happened, So, and by the time she does come around to, which, obviously she puts her iPod or whatever on shuffle. And of course, Annie Lennox's No More I Love You plays. And that makes her go check on Bill. But she hears like some moaning, and she's like, oh, he must be getting it on with someone, especially considering like I don't know if he like put it to, like she saw like photos of Fangs, Bill and Lee. So there's something there. So I'm sure that made it, like I said, feel conflicted, because it's like, hey, Bill is someone I have a connection to. Lee means a lot to me. She's an inspiration. And having those two worlds collide in that regard just kind of makes you go like, oh, because you were probably feeling more like, oh, it was kind of nice that we came together, especially when she saw that moment and especially the way Bill was around Zoomer. That's what, like, that makes it seem even more clear. Like, not even just Andy or Lee's reaction, but just the way, like, Bill was so playful with Zoomer, and just like, yeah, that felt too purposeful. And you could tell Darby kind of really liked seeing Bill in that regard, because their mission was just focused on serial killers. So she herself, like, had tunnel vision and didn't really recognize what was kind of going on. Once again, hindsight and everything, and hindsight being 2020. But yeah, she goes outside and around, and she sees Bill hurt, and he's just like, no, like, just stay with me at the end. Nobody, no. Even though we do kind of all die alone, no one wants to die alone. No one, it's that, especially him and Darby's history. It's like, right, just stay with me, I guess almost for the poeticness of, you left me so long ago, but then I ended up leaving you the one time and never came back into your life until now. And now it's like we're back together, but it's just under these circumstances, just stay with me at the very end. So we end the episode with her rushing off to get help. So we'll see how that ultimately ends up playing out. I don't think this is going to end up being like a rogue AI situation of like, oh, Ray's responsible. There's probably going to be a thing of he's not artificial intelligence. They gave him some other like something intelligence. They changed the name for it. It was something Zoomer and Andy said, but I don't know. I'm really interested to see where this goes. Like I said, there is another episode which I'm going to jump on after this, but I'm excited to see where this goes. This is a mini series, so it's a one and done. I do believe it's based off of a book, if I remember correctly. At least I thought it was. Maybe I'm completely thinking of something else. I could have sworn this was based on a book, but what I was reading really quickly didn't seem like it was. It just seemed like it's like a Britt Marling co-created this. So it just seems like it's like her and her writing partners. Like, well, I think her and Zhao. I'm not going to say Zhao's last name because I'm going to butcher that. But I wonder. I think they are writing partners. I think typically. So yeah, it seems like this is just kind of something of their own creation that is not based on anything. At least not that I quickly found, so I could easily be wrong. But either way, I'm going on this whole tangent. Like I said, I'm excited to see where things kind of take us going forward from here. But really, that's all I wanted to talk about. So the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day and goodbye.